Cynthia Allen here. We're coming to the end of day 6, and we're going to begin a new track, which is structure and tensegrity. But before we do that, I just want to encourage you to look a little bit around, find the chat area, and start having conversations. And whenever, sometimes we worry about in these presentations we shouldn't be chatting with other people, but we're actually encouraging a little bit of dialogue behind the scenes. That way you can hear from each other, colleagues, other people that you might be interested in exploring a topic with, but also we will be looking at your chat and we'll be folding your chat discussion into the panel discussion that will be tomorrow. So it can be very valuable to us in that way. Arlene Klein will be over there in the chat area. She's probably already introduced herself. And if you have questions or problems, you can also check in with her about those. So I'm pleased to introduce to you today John Sharkey. He's an international educator, author, and authority in areas of clinical anatomy and exercise science, human movement, and manual treatment of chronic pain. He's a graduate at the University of Dundee, the University of Liverpool, and the University of Chester. He's done undergraduate and postgraduate studies in the areas of exercise physiology, clinical anatomy, and a postgraduate certification in education. He currently is on the faculty as a senior lecturer in the medicine, dentistry, and life sciences area of the University of Chester, NTC in Dublin, and is a program leader of the biotensegrity focused THEAL, is it THEAL?
Yes, THEAL.
THEAL soft fixed cadaver dissection courses, which are, I think that's what I've been following you about online. You'll tell us a little bit more about that. At Dundee University in Scotland. He has been working around the area of biotensegrity with Dr. Stephen Levin. And many of us in the Feldenkrais world know Dr. Levin, but maybe might not be as familiar with John, but I think you're just going to be absolutely thrilled with what he's going to help us tease apart and understand. He is on the editorial board of the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies and the International Journal of Osteopathic Medicine and other professional journals. He has what he had used to call anyway, one theory explaining human anatomy and living anatomy. And so I think we're going to find out from him his own ideas about how we grow ourselves, how we self-develop, how we self-emerge through this lens of biotensegrity. And so welcome, John.
Oh, Cynthia, thanks very much. I'm listening to that introduction and I'm thinking to myself, who's that again? I want to hear that guy. So it's me you're talking about. My goodness. It's amazing.
Yeah, you can even hear yourself on replay if you want.
Wow, that's cool. Well, it's great to be here, Cynthia, and it's great to be able to talk and to spend time with the Feldenkrais community. So I'm really excited about this.
Good. And we're excited. We have a lot of people tuning in, and so we have such a wide variety of people. So maybe about 50% are Feldenkrais practitioners, and then the rest are all kinds of different backgrounds, including people who've just been struggling with pain. So I think your presentation is going to be very, very interesting and really open a lot of our minds. I've been following you a bit, not hugely, but a bit for the last couple of years. And very fascinated with the work you're doing, like with the 3D models and, really getting the word out there in the dissection world, bringing into specialty groups. It sounds like you're actually getting physicians and surgeons now into your dissection courses. Is that correct?
Well, that is such an important aspect of the work that I do, because even this weekend in Canada, I had somebody who, asked me the question, why are you involved in teaching anatomy at undergraduate and postgraduate levels if you don't agree with the anatomy? And I have to be honest with you, I've heard this question many times before, but every time I hear it, I'm still surprised by it, because I choose to work from the inside. When I say the inside, I mean within the medical profession. I mean, this coming summer, you have what's known, so each country has an association of anatomists. So you would have, for instance, the Anatomical Society in the United Kingdom, or the British Association of Clinical Anatomists, the American Association of Clinical Anatomists, and each of these associations would then be a member what you might call a confederation. It's an international association of associations of anatomists. It's a bit of a mouthful. They run their event every 5 years. And this year, the IFAA are running their 19th Congress in London, in England, and they have invited myself and Professor Carla Steckel, who's Professor of Anatomy in Padua University, to come and present to them. And I really believe that the work that I'm doing within the medical world has led to that invitation. So we now have surgeons, anatomists, of course, surgeons, anaesthetists, histology experts, all arriving. 1,500 will be at this event, and this gives me an opportunity to give them a new view, a new vision of human anatomy, and that to me is hugely important.
Well, it's really exciting to me because, as we know, there's been an approach in anatomy that's been more about the parts in some ways. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like it's been a necessary stage in our understanding. So I don't want to knock it. Actually,
no,
a necessary stage in our understanding, and we've gotten many incredible treatments out of that, and many incredible procedures out of it. But I think you're going to help us see that there might be possible that as surgeons and all of us understand more about how our body works at all levels, that we might actually get a lot more out of it in the long run, with maybe fewer complications around some issues, I'm thinking.
Well, I am a lover of science. I love science and I love research. There is one thing that we must grasp from the beginning. Research is not designed to prove anything. So if somebody says to you that research has proven, please believe me, they are completely and utterly incorrect. Research provides us with evidence, and evidence can change as the years progress because we have new equipment, we have new ways of being able to visualize and look at things, and therefore we say, we thought it was this way, but it is in fact this way. Now, I want the listeners, I want the Feldenkrais community to understand that I am truly a supporter of science and research. However, the map is the territory. So let me just explain. I loved that focus because it really helped me to reflect on biotensegrity and what it was I wanted to say to the Feldenkrais community. So imagine for a moment that somebody has provided us with a map. Now, this map is literally hundreds of years old. It has been contributed to by Professor this and Professor that. In this particular case, Erasistratus, Galen, Harvey, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo. It has been added to over 2,500 years. Let's imagine that this map has been dictated to verbally. So it explains using beautiful words and vocabulary how to get from A to B. And in fact, let's even make it more beautiful. Let's say it's written on beautiful in parchment paper. My God, this map is just amazing. And it tells you how to get from Dublin to San Francisco. You follow all the details and you arrive in San Francisco, and I come along and I say to you, well, actually, you're not in San Francisco. And you say, what are you talking about? Look at all the people who have contributed to this map. Look at the language they have used, the vocabulary. Look at the detail that they've given to us. And you're telling us that we're not in San Francisco. And I'm saying to you, yes, because, and here's the problem, they all thought that they were in Dublin when they wrote the instructions. And in fact, they were not in Dublin. They were somewhere else. And so it doesn't matter how beautiful the descriptions, it doesn't matter the name of the individual or how clever that individual was. The facts of the matter is that we have gotten fundamental aspects of human anatomy and physiology, of living anatomy and physiology, of nature. We have gotten it wrong. And we need to correct that. And it's not a far remove. So as you said a little earlier, Cynthia, We will not throw the baby out with the bath water. But let's stop for a moment and think about anatomy. Let's stop and think about the first telecommunication system. Let's think about the first automobile, the first locomotive train. And then let's think about anatomy. How has anatomy changed? I'm not talking about surgical interventions, surgical techniques. I'm not talking about, confocal laser endoscopy. I'm not talking about these techniques that we can use. They're modern techniques and they're science-based. But the study of anatomy, that this is my biceps brachii, this is the origin and this is the insertion, that has not changed in 2,500 years. It certainly hasn't changed since the 15 or 1600s. Does that not seem a little implausible and unreasonable that it hasn't changed in all those years, so that we've had the last word, the only word on anatomy? I really want to encourage people to think, open their hearts, open their minds, and let's invite in a new way of looking at the human body and a new way of describing the human body, living anatomy.
That's fantastic. I think that what you're suggesting and why it's so difficult, we talk a lot in the Feldenkrais work about self-image. And so when you have a deeply held set of beliefs that you've been steeped in from very, very young, and it is even generational. Now you have a generational self-image, you have a professional self-image, you have your own individual self-image. And when you ask us to change our map, or even to entertain changing our map, it can seem so catastrophic. It's like as if we're suggesting that the world is not flat, right?
That's exactly what it is.
That's really what it's like. And so we can appreciate, I can appreciate as somebody who's actually not very invested in anatomy at all. So it's it's not a big deal for me to entertain another idea. I didn't come through the same field as you all came through. But it is a big deal for many people. And so anybody who is at least willing to hear the possibility of another map, of a different dimension to the map, of a completely different starting point that might lead to a different ending point, I think that's pretty significant. And so I'm very pleased with the work you're doing, and I can't wait to hear more.
Well, of course, we are talking essentially about Dr. Stephen Levin's interpretation of biotensegrity. But Stephen, will tell you himself that what we have done is, over the years, is we have brought disparate groups, different people and disparate opinions. We meet outside a beautiful city called Ghent in Brussels every year, and we'll be there again this October. And we discuss and we argue and we put forward hypotheses. And so what I teach, of course, is based upon Dr. Levin's biotensegrity, but my model, my take is tainted with anatomy. And so it's anatomy for the 21st century, and that the full title is Biotensegrity, Anatomy for the 21st Century. And in that regard, Cynthia, anatomy for the 21st century talks about an inner universe. And this inner universe, deep to our skin, must reflect the outer universe, the inner cosmos and the outer cosmos. So biotensegrity, anatomy for the 21st century, does not simply explain anatomy. It explains everything. It helps me to be a better husband. It helps me to be a better father. It helps me to be a better friend. It helps me to be a better human being. I know we won't have time to get into all of that today. We're going to talk about anatomy for the 21st century. And in fact, what I'm going to do, just to start off, if you don't mind,
go right.
We might come back to this. I hope you can see this. This is just a small little spring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply force to the spring, and I'm going to pull what we might in Ireland call the BJ's out of it. I'm going to pull the heck out of it, and I'm going to bend it this way, and then I'm going to bend it that way, bend it like this. And I'm going to hold that. Hopefully you can get to see that I've really bent it all out of shape. And if I said to somebody, would you be able to take this spring and put the spring back exactly as I had originally got it? I've just got some water that I'm going to pour into a cup beside me here. I'm sorry that your viewers won't get to see this, but I will show them me putting. So there's the spring, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the spring and I'm going to place it into the cup, and then I'm going to take it back out again, not over my keyboard. Wait till I just dry that and put it on my handle, and you can see the spring has come back again. Can you see that?
I can see it.
Now, the reason I'm doing that is just that so I said that I love science. When we deal with science, and in fact, Dr. Neil Peace many people will have heard of his paper last summer on the interstitium. What Neil was using was endoscopy to take a look at particular cells, but they did it on a patient who was living. When we look at cells or cell cultures, we have to put them into specific fixatives. It could be a paraffin block. And so we're taking them out of the body, we're putting them into chemicals, we're fixing them, and then we slice them. And so the problem with that is, of course, that you're going to see emergent properties. You're going to see changes in the tissue and the expressions of those tissues. Once you take a tissue out of the human body, it's no longer its natural environment. And similar to this spring, if this spring is in the proper environment, it will return. But when it's out here, it will not return. And the secret to this spring and how it operates is, in fact, temperature. So once it's got the right temperature, it will be able to recoil. And this is one of the very basic points I want to make to individuals. We have to be so careful when we take a piece of tissue out of the human body, we put it into some container, and we expect it to perform and to react in the way that it would under our skin. You have to be so careful in that regard. So I'm just stating that, and as a setup, because it may become important in the future.
Right. Yes, and it's an example of how important it was to be able to have those capacities in order to be able to do anatomy in the first place, but then hasn't really updated in terms of its process. And so you're helping to update the process of how
Absolutely.
we do dissection.
Well, you'll see with Neil Thies's work, and I don't want to speak on behalf of Neil, but on behalf of Dr. Neil Thies's work, what we discover, in fact, is that when we did these slices, having stained tissues, etc., usually with H&E or some other type of stain, Golgi stainer, we would see small openings, and we were told that these openings were, in fact, again, an emergent property, because as the tissue dehydrates and pulled, we now discover that they are not holes, that they are not emergent properties, they're not artifacts, they're actually real. And this is where we now have this new discovery in terms of the interstitium. So I'll just leave that one there.
Wonderful. I think you've got some slides to show us.
I do.
So let's go there. Mm-hmm.
Are we good?
We're good.
Okay, so the very first slide I want to show you is, are we good with that, Cynthia? Can we see that one?
Wonderful.
Okay, so the reason that I'm showing you this, and I'm going to be quite quick, so I'm assuming that people can come back and listen to this time and time again. So if I have to be going at a pace, please don't be overly worried, because you will be able to come back and listen to it again. Take a look at this. This is an image that obviously is a reflection of Vitruvian Man, and it is the work of Dr. Niall Galloway. And Dr. Niall Galloway is a member of the Biotensegrity Interest Group. And what's wonderful here is that many people would look at the work of Leonardo da Vinci and say, well, who could be better than Leonardo da Vinci? Who could know as much or more than Leonardo da Vinci? Vitruvian Man is done and dusted. We've had the last word and the only word. There is no point in going any further. However, in biotensegrity, Dr. Niall Galloway knew that when we have two, there has to be an emergent property. So 2 leads to 3, and of course 4 and 5 and 6 and 7. But let's just stop at 3 for the moment. And Dr. Galloway knew that if there has to be a third, well, then Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man was missing some aspect. And so he came up with the triangle. And in fact, the triangle and the way in which the body is represented is reflecting embryology. So what you see in this particular situation is that the digits come before the wrist comes before the elbow, and the elbow comes before the shoulder. In terms of the lower limb, you'll see that the feet are on the same plane as the pelvis. And so every doctor knows to check a newborn child when they're born to make sure that the anus is intact and there is no issue, because that is really, in terms of our development, it's one of the last areas to form and develop, and therefore the feet and the pelvis have an intrinsic relationship. So there are individuals who would say, oh, everything is from the feet up, the foundation. There are the craniosacral people, and even within neuromuscular therapy, there are the cranial people as well, who would say, oh no, it's from the head down. And there are those individuals who focus on the pelvis. From my perspective, I do all three. I go from the head down, from the feet up, and I go from the pelvis out, because there is hierarchy in the human body. But I wanted to just start with that image because I want to just provide evidence to you, visual evidence, that things are not done and dusted, and we haven't had the last word when it comes to anatomy. Here's a beautiful image of the butterfly sitting on the leaf. And the reason that I show you the clear-winged butterfly is just to show a reflection within nature. And it's one of the things I like to say. It's a phrase I steal from Dr. Richard Feynman. That is that if it contradicts nature, it is wrong. I just think it's a powerful image. And for those people who don't know me, I just want to give a small little overview. This man on the bottom right-hand side is Dr. David Simons. And the man and woman on the top left-hand side is Dr. Stephen Levin and Janet Travell. And so Dr. David Simons was my mentor, and myself and Dr. Levin go back so many years. In fact, we can't even quite remember when we first met. And then also I want to mention very quickly my colleague, Dr. Leon Chatow, because Dr. Leon Chatow was such an influence in my life, and here he is with myself and Dr. Simons. And Dr. Chatow, unfortunately, passed away last year. And as I say, he was a huge influence in my life. I just want to pay tribute to him on this occasion. This is myself with Dr. Gunther von Hagen. The woman in the middle is Professor Carla Stecko. And next to her, on her right-hand side, your left-hand side, is Professor Vladimir Chermensky. And then two assistants in the dissection room in the Von Hagen Institute. Down below, I'm with some people. This is on the man with the blue apron is Professor Hannes Stanka, who was so generous in giving me his time and his insights. And then behind me there, you can see Dr. Robert Schleip. So this is work we are doing in the FasciaNet Plastination Project, if people haven't heard of it, the FNPP. And what we are doing basically is we are producing plastinates, silicone-based specimens of human fascia, of both the superficial fascia and of the human fascia, of the deep fascia, I beg your pardon. Let me just play this video quickly, G, because this is from the Von Hagen Center. And this is so typical of classical anatomy. In other words, the skin has been removed, the subcutaneous tissue has been removed, and almost all of the fascia, the iliotibial band, is intact, and some fascia over the lower abdomen. But really, the fascia has been removed so we can see what in anatomy would be considered the important structures. We can see the iliogastric nerve or the hypogastric nerve. We can see a portion there of the femoral nerve, and so on. So the nerves and the blood vessels are what really are important in human anatomy. And what's missing, of course, is the fascia, the fasciae. That has been cut away, scraped away, and taken away because really there was no appreciation of the human fascia. Here is the fascia in situ. And what you're seeing here, that brownish tissue is muscle tissue. It's not as red as it would be in a living person. However, you can see that it is intrinsically linked, it is attached, it is continuous with the fascia as I pull up on the fascia in that particular image. So that has to be taken away, and believe me when I tell you, it's painstaking to be able to take the fascia off the muscle tissue. Here we have the muscle tissue investing, but even the word investing won't do it justice, because that almost gives the impression that the muscle tissue goes through the fascia. It never went through the fascia as such. It just is part of a continuum. So what you have in the human body is just soft matter and soft tissue, soft matter. And within that soft matter, you have speciality. So it depends on what's called for by the forces that are penetrating and going through the tissue. There will be a call for either stiffness and hardness, or there'll be a call for softness. And so really depending on where the tissue is in the human body, it will be soft or hard. And therefore, in my world, bone is in fact fascia. And I'll put forward another argument for that a little later on. Here we see one of my favorite images. This is actually a muscle here in the forearm. This is our palmaris longus. Not everybody has one, but as we pull up on the palmaris longus to the viewer's right-hand side, you can see the fascia being pulled up and creating a little pocket as atmospheric air gets in underneath the fascia. But you could also see these fascial slips. I put an arrow to try to show the direction. Well, those slips are showing you that the connective tissue around the muscle, which we call the epimysium in classical anatomy, is in fact continuous with the muscle next to it. In other words, it becomes the epimysium of its neighboring muscle. Now, muscle fibers pull on the epimysium, they pull on the fascia, and therefore the forces that are generated are being spread to neighboring muscles, to neighboring tissues. So this idea that forces are going from point A to point B is a misdemeanor. That's a linear approach to human anatomy, and it simply does not exist. So if you wish to talk about forces moving along a track of some kind, or a point between A and B, no matter who's explaining it to you, no matter how beautiful the wording is, it's a linear model, and therefore it's incomplete, it's incorrect. Here are some other images of human anatomy, and I wanted to show these images to try to get across the idea of origin and insertion. Somebody has taken literally hours of doing meticulous work in order to be able to cut away all of the relationships that you see here. And we see on the top left-hand side, as you look at the screen, we see a forearm. Skin has been removed, so we can get to see some of the superficial veins. And then to the right-hand side, we've done a cross-section of an upper limb of the anatomical arm. This is the forearm on the left-hand side. This is the arm on the right. And to be able to create an image of an origin and an insertion literally takes an artist. It's an artist's vision, and it simply does not exist in the human body other than an anatomist would come along and bring it into existence. It's a tough one to get across, but I'm hoping that people, for instance, if you look at the bottom left-hand side, this is a lower limb, and we're getting to see, lateral or medial muscles, including the gastrocnemius, etc., coming up to meet the adductors and hamstrings. And there is no clear delineation between one thing and another. This idea that there are origins and insertions, like these small, neat, classical points that the muscle pulls on, really that's just not the case. The muscle tissue goes into the periosteum, into the bone. It's actually fibers called Sharkey's fibers. And those Sharkey's fibers become the intrices of the bone, and then they have to come back out again as Sharkey's fibers. So in other words, what you're seeing is a continuity, not somehow muscle sticking itself or attaching itself or somehow fixing itself to bone as a separate entity. It's just a falsity.
It sort of sounds like what you're saying is that the tissue transforms itself according to the need. So it looks like it's one thing here and another thing here and then another thing here, but really it's all this. It's still the same continuous process, just transforming according to what its use is at that moment, or the need for how it needs to interplay, or.
Exactly. So in other words, the morphology changes, the hardness might change, to softness, but the facts of the matter are everything is the same. It's all the same stuff. In fact, I couldn't make it any easier than saying, if you stop and think about what it is that you eat carbohydrates, you eat fats, and you eat proteins. And that's what you're made of. There are no other, okay, we can go into the minerals, we can go into the, cobalt, or we can go into calciums, and we can go into, there's gold in them there hills. Well, yes, there is, and that's very, very good for electrical activity, etc. But the fact of the matter is that we are predominantly glycosaminoglycans and some fatty tissue. And so it really depends then on how you put them together. So in the osteofascial system, as I like to call it, basically what you have is the oxyapatite. So you have this crystal, this salt crystal, which stiffens and starches the soft tissue. So it starts out like this, but then it stiffens and starches, and it just becomes hard, because that is what is called for in that particular tissue. So it's a continuum of speciality. here are some beautiful images of some of the final specimens that we achieved. Remember now, these are now plastinated, so in other words, when you touch them, they would feel like silicone. And this is a false anatomy. It's no more a real anatomy than the first images I showed you of the lower limb, but in the first image, all of the fascia had been removed, and we were left with the muscle tissue and the veins and the arteries. In these particular pictures, we have taken all of that stuff away, and we're leaving just the fascia. So I call this anatomy from the inside out. It's no more real than the other anatomy, but it leads us to a conversation of saying, right, well, what if we put everything together? And that's what we really need to do. We need to consider everything together. And these are just powerful, I think these are powerful educational images and powerful tools for teaching about continuity. And we can see that the fascia becomes the bone. It's a continuity. I have to take my scalpel and I have to work really hard to be able to separate that fascia from the bone. It's just, it's impossible without the scalpel.
Right. For me, when I first saw you showing these particular models, I just had a sense of how substantial the fascia is, that I'm not sure I really had a sense of that before. I appreciate you saying no more valid than the other models, but it does add something to my understanding that was not there before.
That's amazing. I love to hear that type of a comment. And remember, this is a cross section of the fascia, but we could have taken it on, this is going across the transverse plane. We could have taken it on the sagittal plane, or we could have done it in some different way. So remember that the fascia is ubiquitous. It is absolutely everywhere. And we've managed to take out some of the planes that are, perhaps maybe 3 millimils and 5 millimils, but the facts of the matter are they go even smaller, and we would have lost some of those little septal tissues and compartments based on the fact that we were pulling muscle tissue out with tweezers. So we had to lose some of the tissue. It was painstaking work. Okay, so here is a tensegrity. This is a model that has two members. It has a compressional member and it has a tensional member. The tensional member is the elastic band, and if one looks at that green bar on the right-hand side, that green strut, you will see there's a little knot in the elastic band. Now, in a tensegrity structure, one member would be continuous, and that would be the elastic band, and the other member would be discontinuous, so that would be one of the struts, the yellow-green struts that we see there. And many people then will say, well, those struts represent bones, and the elastic band would represent the contractile tissues, the fasciae, the ligaments, aponneuroses, the retinacula of the human body. But I want people to understand that, of course, this is a small lie, because that elastic band is not continuous. It had to be tied off, and there has to be a little knot in it. And the reason for that, of course, is that somebody made that rubber band. Now, we could have a rubber band that was cut in a certain way so that we'd have a continuity. But I'm just pointing out the obvious white lie that's being told here. So again, two members. One is continuous, one is discontinuous. One is representing a compressional member, which would be the bars or the struts, and the other is representing a tensional member. And it is the relationship between the two. I'm just going to go back here and see if I can find one. So it is the relationship between the two that gives the structure its integrity, so that if I push it down, it will spring back up again once I take the force away. And you'll also notice that none of the bars are touching. So that is an important aspect of a tensegral-based structure. In human anatomy and living anatomy, there is only one member. So this is a major difference between a tensegrity structure and a biotensegrity structure. In the biotensegrity structure, we have only one member, hence, Cynthia, why I was talking to yourself and the listeners about there being just one tissue on a continuum with speciality along that continuum. There is only one, and I'll make more sense of there is only one in just a moment. Here is Darcy Wentworth Thompson, who lived in Dundee University, which is my alma mater. And in fact, if we look up the top right-hand side, I hope our faces aren't in the way too much there, but you can see that there are some fish I wouldn't worry about it. We can actually see one of the fish. We can also see the face of humans. Darcy Thompson had a Cartesian grid, which he could actually, mathematically, he could adjust in any particular direction he wished to. And by simply compressing or tensioning along this grid, he could come up with any species of fish or plant. And really, he was talking about biotensegrity. He didn't, of course, use that word, but that is literally what he was doing. So simply by changing the tension and compression, he could come up with any species. And what this is leading us to is simply saying that we are not ultimately or solely or exclusively dictated by our DNA and RNA, but we're also dictated by the environment and the forces that influence us in our environment. Hence why I spoke about where am I going with this little spring? Because if this spring is in the right environment, it will behave in a very different way. And when we do this, we'll say, oh, look, it doesn't recoil. Well, sorry, this spring does recoil. It just has to be in the right environment. So if I write up a paper to say that this particular spring and this type of metal is no good for recoiling, well, we're really speaking and describing a falsity. Now, here is a slide that talks about some of the great minds that went before us, from Aristotle, Archimedes, Leonardo da Vinci, and of course the father of biomechanics, Borelli. And one can understand why in the 15th and 16th centuries, actually even before them, we had Socrates, who really gave us the image in our mind of a lever system, a 2-bar lever system. And really, this is what anatomy is based upon. It's based upon levers and the laws of levers. Now, Archimedes, I beg your pardon, not Socrates, but Archimedes was really seen as being a superstar because he was able to pull one of the king's ships that was out at sea, and he was able to pull it into port using nothing more than ropes, pulleys. And the king thought he was fantastic. And in fact, Archimedes thought he was fantastic himself. He's famously known as having said, give me a lever, a fulcrum, or an axis, a point around which movement takes place. So give me a lever and a fulcrum and a place to stand, and I can move the earth. In other words, he was basically saying, and I could do anything. And of course, we have to be impressed with their work. However, this is a compression structure. This happens to be an obelisk from the Phoenix Park in Dublin. Every major city in the world, certainly in Europe, has an obelisk. This is a brick on brick or a block on block structure, which relies on gravity to hold it in place. And you'll see that with such a structure, it has to get wider as we go down the column, and then it has to be really wide at the bottom in order to be able to support the encumbered weight. And this is what people think about the human body. And in fact, if we stop to think about the bones that go from the base of my skull to the coccyx, we even call it the vertebral column, because people believe that it is a column. And of course, if you were to bend forward into this position, in other words, if you were to go into forward flexion, it would now be a beam. So what is it? Is it a column or is it a beam? And of course, it's neither. And this is what biomechanics is based upon. Biomechanics is based upon the point around which the movement takes place, the external force acting upon it, and the force that would be needed in order to be able to move those external, if you're holding on to something, those external forces. And we know exactly, what those forces are. And the amount of force that one would need is so great on the lower back that you would simply rupture all of your vertebral bodies. It just doesn't make any sense. And in fact, what they've tried to do in recent times is to introduce into the equation an opportunity to fix the problem. And they introduced something called intra-abdominal pressure. And quite literally in biomechanics, if they are missing a figure so that they can put into a mathematical equation, they simply give intra-abdominal pressure the figure that they're missing, slip that into the equation, and the equation works. But as Sergei Grekovetsky, Professor Grekovetsky has told us time and time again, Professor Grekovetsky went and did the research, and he worked out the amount of intra-abdominal pressure that a human being would need to lift anything over 50 kilograms, and I say 50 kilograms because the weakest link in the chain are the erector spinae. And so you have to always go by the weakest link in the chain, and they simply cannot lift anything more than 50 kilograms. So if you see a bodybuilder or somebody else squatting with 250 kilograms, you say, well, then how are they able to do that? And somebody says, well, it's intra-abdominal pressure. Well, Professor Sergei Grekovetsky tells us that if that was the case, then the person would simply explode. So we can take a look at some basic math. And I'm sorry if people get scared when I mention math. Please don't be scared of math. It's really wonderful. But you have force equals mass times gravity. Sine A is the angle of the joint. So from Newton's second law, we have force equals mass times acceleration. And this gives us mass times acceleration equals mass times gravity. And sine A is going to be the angle of the joint. That tells us that acceleration equals gravity, and it's dependent on the angle of the joint. So if the joint becomes vertical, then we're going to a 90-degree angle. So as it approaches vertical, it means that acceleration equals time gravity, and you are in free fall. Hopefully people can work out that. Try to make it as simplistic as possible. And what that basically tells us is that from classical biomechanics, it is impossible. I was going to say virtually impossible. It is impossible to explain how this animal's femur can be at that angle to its tibia. It's just an impossibility. It's also an impossibility to explain how those skinny little bones can take the weight of the giraffe. So we need some new explanations in terms of human anatomy. This is an X-ray of a lower limb. We can see the femur, we can see the tibia, and you see what's called a virtual space. Now, there are no real spaces in human anatomy. This is a virtual space, and people would know that there is some cartilage tissue, etc. in here. But the point is that there is, in fact, space. And some people say, oh, well, what happens when you're running, for instance, is that the bones come closer together and your cartilage tissue acts as a shock absorber. And this just couldn't be further from the truth, because your cartilage tissue, most people haven't seen what cartilage tissue looks like. And it's very difficult to get the opportunity to see that because, for instance, in a cadaver, in the dissection room, the individual is dead, the cartilage has dried out, it has changed, so in other words, we have emergent properties, and you can't really trust what you're seeing in a cadaver. So what does cartilage tissue look like in a living human being? Well, let's just show you an example of, so what you have here is a knee joint. You can see the steel probe coming in. And now I have to say to you that a saline fluid has been injected into the joint in order to create space, which really is not a very good thing, but one would not be able to get an endoscope into the joint if you didn't do that. But if the viewer just takes a look at the stainless steel probe, the joint is going to close again now. They're going to suck out the fluid, and the 2 points are going to approximate each other again, but they never touch. But what I'd like you to do is look at the stainless steel probe. Can you see the indentation?
Yes.
So that indentation gives you a sense of the softness of cartilage. There it is, there's the cartilage tissue. And the best we can come up with, really, myself and Stephen, Dr. Levin have talked about this, and we reckon that it's the equivalent of the white of a hard-boiled egg. So now people have at least a visual of what the cartilage tissue looks like. And the idea that every time you go running, that you have 6 to 12 times your body weight crashing down on that tissue, to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And we need to have a different model, a different paradigm. Here's a wrist, and on movement, you would see that the joint space is not compromised. Things move around, but the joint space never becomes compromised. Here is an image of a bird, but I chose to show you the bird in X-ray, because if somebody's seen the bird standing there, they wouldn't really get an appreciation of the fact that its femur is at a 90-degree angle to the tibia. How on earth is that bird managing to stand like that all day? Sometimes they go on their belly, but of course the male penguin will have their egg just beneath the belly, sitting on their feet, and they'll be like that for several months, waiting for mama to return. How on earth a person can stand in that particular position, I would not know. Here is a beautiful video by my colleague Jan van Eycken, and if anybody wants to see the full version of this video, they can go to Jan van Eyken's website, which details will come up now in a moment. And this is a video called Becoming. This is a video of embryology. As you look at the screen, you will see that line right up the middle, and that is the primitive streak. And what I want the viewers to look at is I want you to look at the way in which the embryo invaginates, turns in on itself. And all those little kind of dark spots you can see, that's the cellular content of the embryo. Now, if people look carefully, they can see like a bag or a sack. And people talk about bags within bags. I do not like that analogy, because that to me promotes like a separate bag to a separate bag. You have one piece of material, one piece of fabric, and what happens with that fabric is that fabric sometimes doubles back on itself and creates a pocket. So you have pockets, and some people say this is a double layer of peritoneum or whatever it may be. It's a pocket because it all came from one piece of tissue. Let me show you something real quick before we get into the embryology then. So here, for instance, is heart. But let me show you how the heart starts embryologically. I'll come back a little bit. And so here is how the heart starts embryologically. It starts as one piece of tissue. So it's very, very, the analogy is very, very similar to me talking to you about there being one tissue and there being a spectrum. Here is the heart. It's one piece of tissue. And what it does is it rotates on itself. And when it finishes its rotation, you now have the heart. And this is just a silicone version of the true anatomy of the heart. This is the work of Professor Torrent Wasp, who unfortunately has died, but he spent his life trying to figure out the true anatomy of the heart. And this is just as I say, a silicone version of it. And it gives us a beautiful visual that it's one piece. It's not, two pieces, an upper and a lower part, etc. And this changes the way in which we look at the physiology and the metabolism and the overall mechanics and workings of the heart. This will change people's descriptions of various different types of coronary diseases or vascular diseases. I haven't got time to go into that today. That's a lecture all on its own. Let's go back to our embryo, and let's take a look at this embryo as it is moving and developing. So we can see it beginning to invaginate and move. Now, this is where it becomes very interesting, because now what's happening is we're seeing this embryo go through itself. And it's rotating and it's turning. This is a very beautiful image. Now, as I say, if anybody wants to look at the full film, they can go to Jan's website. They'll have to pay a few dollars to be able to see the whole thing, but that's how he's a professional photographer.
When you say it's going through itself, you mean that it's not just that the tissue is folding in, but actually it's kind of merging. Okay, it's a great question. So let me just, if I can explain. Here is a circle. Now, in human anatomy, you have an eye on your right side and you have an eye on your left side. The information from the right eye goes to the right brain. The information from the left eye goes to the left brain. However, something else happens. Information from your right eye goes to the left side, and information from the left eye goes to the right side. We call this a decussation. Deca comes from the word deca. Deca means 10, and 10 is represented as X, and therefore you get a decussation. What happens when these images arrive at the brain, because they're not both on the midline? If we had one eye here and one eye here, well, in fact, even that wouldn't be right, because one would be more superior than the other. But we have information coming from our eyes to the brain, and the brain says, oh, these images are not exactly matching up. So what the brain does is the brain overlaps the images, and the brain gives us what we refer to as pseudo three-dimensional vision. In fact, so humans actually do not see in 3 dimensions. It's a strange thing for people to take on board. Your brain decides what it is that you need to see, and your brain provides you with this gift that we call depth, and this is 3 dimension. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if we could see in other dimensions? Because what you're seeing there, in my estimation, in the developing embryo, is the fact that the cells are moving through the entire
structure. So I believe that that's an extra dimension. When we look at this circle, if we had the vision to see the true anatomy of this circle, what we would in fact see, oops, if I can get this to come up, I'm afraid it's been traveling with me in my suitcase, we would see this. And this, of course, is the torrid. If I try to push this down, it resists me. However, if I rotate my hands in opposite directions, now you get to see an intervertebral disc. You get to see the anatomy of the fasciae in the human body. This is a beautiful reflection of human anatomy. And the major difference between this model and this model is that this model is made of one piece. It's just one. It's not made of two things. It's made of one thing, and it goes through itself, you see? So for me, this is an even better model than the tensegrity. These are sometimes called flow rings. People get them on the internet, and they're beautiful teaching aids. And again, I could do probably a full day's lecture just on this. And so what I'm saying, really, Cynthia, is that our own vision can be a block to us being able to see the true reality of our anatomy. In other words, don't always trust what it is that you can see. And the final point I want to make, and this is why I put up my icosahedra baby, is that you are a tensegrity within a tensegrity within a tensegrity. You have to remember that you grew yourself. Therefore, you self-assembled. And of course, if somebody sees a surgeon making an incision on your skin, you'll see that the margins of the skin will recede from each other. This is shown beautifully in Dr. Jean-Claude Gumberto's videos, Strolling Under the Skin. And that tells you that there's a pre-stress in the connective tissues. So the tissues are they're not just pre-stressed, they're self-stressed, self-assembled, self-organized. At no stage does a woman have to go into a hospital and ask a doctor to Velcro in a liver or to Velcro in a spleen or to attach on an upper limb. You grew yourself. And if we can get people to grasp that concept, then you'll really understand that there can be no parts. There is only a continuity. There is only one. Sorry if I get a little emotional about that. But so this is biotensegrity anatomy for the 21st century. This is the Stobach-Harris research, and what this basically shows us is that depending on the amount of compression or the amount of tension that there is on the tissue, this will then inform the cells as to whether they are to be, under high compression, which is cartilage, or under low compression, it's going to be a softer mesenchyme. That's as simple as it is. They are dictated by the forces that are going through them. So it's not just genetics, but it's also epigenetics. So let me give you a quick little visual regarding his bone fascia. The reason I give you this visual is that in the departments of anatomy, where we do dissection and research, really the things that we do in the departments are the same from week to week. Now, obviously, students are going to maybe take tissues out of the body, and they're going to look to see if there is blood vessels in places that we didn't think that there were blood vessels and that sort of thing. But really, the curriculum dictates that we do things in a certain way. What you're going to see is quite unusual, because what's happened here is we've taken a pelvis and two femurs. The ligamentous tissue are intact. You'll see the sacrum in place, and you'll see all of this, the sacral, sacroiliac ligaments in place as well. And this has taken about 5 days to produce this specimen. It has to go into a particular bath, something similar to vinegar, believe it or not. And anybody looking at this webinar can do the same thing. You can take a chicken bone, put it into a jar of vinegar, close it, put it into your fridge, and maybe every second day or so, take the jar out, empty out the vinegar, put in fresh vinegar. And after about 5 days, you will get a similar effect. And what you'll be able to do is you will be able to take the bone, which will now be free of deoxyapatite, and you will quite literally be able to tie a knot in the bone. So when I show students this specimen, they go, oh my goodness, this is fascia. And of course it's fascia. All it is fascia without the crystals, the salts that make it stiff and hard. And I think this again is a powerful image because people don't expect to see bone doing something like this. This is not, of course, healthy bone. Don't walk away thinking this is healthy bone. This is, and you can see, as I say, the ligamentous system is also intact because the ligaments are also part of that continuum. I think it's worthwhile.
It is worthwhile. I mean, I've done the little experiment with just a chicken bone, and it's always like a keeper. So this is really much more impressive.
Well, I don't think people generally ever get to see something like this. It's a unique image. You know, when would somebody have a pelvis and two femurs at their disposal to do something like this? But the reason that I've done this is because I want this to be a strong a powerful educational visual for individuals who struggle with thinking that bone that is so hard could be fascia. But of course, bone in the right hands, for instance, if I had a hold of your forearm, I could demonstrate to you that bone is malleable. Bone is soft. It's not unyielding. Bone has to yield. It has to yield to the forces that are going through it when you're running. Otherwise, you'd fracture every moment. So again, as I say, I think these are very, very important and worthwhile educational images, powerful images. This is, of course, the type of image that we see on books related to biomechanics. We get to see, for instance, this last one there on the right-hand side, we get to see bolts and screws, and we get to see these metal objects, but yet the word bio is in there. Of course, that's what we replace hips and knees with, because we think we can. We think we can replace knees and hips with screws and bolts and stainless steel and ceramics. And I'm not saying that, you know, some people don't do a good job. They do a good job. But if we could get people to start thinking of new materials, and if we could start getting people to think of the body, not as hard matter physics, but as soft matter physics, I think we would start changing the type of way we approach surgery. I want to say something very quickly just on this topic of stretching. People ask all the time about stretching. So let me very quickly give you an example. I've got another model here that I can show, but the reason I'm going to show this one is that this really is like an origami. What you have here is one piece of paper. Now, in folding the paper, we have created deficiencies. So the lines upon which the folds have taken place can be seen as a deficiency within the overall structure. So if this was a human body, you would then refer to that deficiency as a joint. So it's one piece, one full piece of paper. That's why I like it, the continuum. You see, everything is just coming from one. But if the right force is applied to this piece of paper, then what it will do is it will look as though it is shortening. But the facts are, there is no aspect of that piece of paper that shortened. There is no aspect of it that lengthened. And this is what's happening with your muscle tissue. This is what's happening with living tissue. This could, for instance, be a set of sarcomeres in a muscle fiber. And again, I'm hoping it's a strong visual image, because people talk about stretching, and what you do in movement classes is not stretching. It's beautiful. Keep doing whatever you do. I'm not saying that. But what people do when they say, oh, I'm stretching, they're actually not stretching. They're shape changing. And in fact, if you were to, let's look at this model that I have now on the screen here. If you were to take that and go any further towards the ceiling and towards the floor, you'll see that the piece of paper would tear. And that would truly be stretching. So when you stretch human tissue, you tear it, you break it, and you will not get it back. And we see that, for example, on the abdomen of women who have gone through pregnancy. And of course, deep to the abdomen as well, that would be evident. And what do they call it, Cynthia? What do they call those marks in the abdomen of women who have gone through pregnancy?
Stretch marks.
They even know what they're called. They even know that this is a mark that reflects the fact that you have truly stretched your tissue. And yet, people don't seem to be able to make that association and that relationship. So what you're getting, in fact, is shape changing. You're not getting stretching. You're not getting anything shortening. You're not getting anything lengthening. And I know I'm probably blowing people's brains away now. They're saying, what? But look at the image that I'm putting in front of you. I think it's worth our while just to
it's very worth our while.
Let's just go through that one more time. Look, you see, it's one origami. It's one piece of paper, but this has a maker. This definitely has a maker. And the maker has put these deficiencies into the system. So we'd call them joints. And based upon the joints and where they are, once the right application of force on the way down, of course, it's compression. Well, actually, it's both, it's compression and tension, but of course, it looks like it's predominantly compression. And on the way up, it's a tension, tensile force. And you see that it shape changes and it does its job. Any comment on that, Cynthia, in particular? Or, there we go. How did I do time-wise?
You did fantastic. That is a lot of information in a short period of time. You can stop sharing your screen if you'd like.
Yes, that's exactly what I will do.
Wow. Well, John, I'm just kind of a little bit in love with your teaching style. It's very evocative, and
thank you.
Yeah, it's extremely evocative. You've really crafted something special. So just kudos to you for your ability to put things together in an understandable format. There's certainly areas that I will need to spend more time with, but then there's these areas that you've given us that I think all of us can go, okay, that's something I can really grasp easily, and then it gives us enough fuel to go into some of the other aspects a little bit more deeply.
Well, I spend a lot of time in children's toy stores.
Uh-huh.
And every time I go through security in airports, I always get pulled aside. But the funny thing is, I really don't believe they're worried. I don't believe they're concerned about me. They see the things I have in my bag and they want to ask me questions. Yeah. And once they start asking me questions, I usually end up with 5 or 6 security people surrounding me and asking me questions. And it's fantastic, because I often then find that those people look up my details after I've left the airport, and I'll sometimes get a phone call from a guy saying, "Oh, my father works security in the airport and he was telling me about you, and I looked up your course. It's amazing." And this happens to me. I never ever get through security in any airport in the world, all based upon these little gizmos that I carry in my bag. I love it.
I bet that's true, and I think what you your own curiosity sparks other people's curiosity. So I think that's what comes through, is your own desire to keep trying to understand. Sure. And
well, I love it. I'm highly motivated by it, and I thank Dr. Levin, for giving me something.
Yeah.
And my other mentors. We're talking about biotensegrity today, but I really, pay homage to him for giving me something useful to do in my life.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You can't. I appreciate that you do take the time to thank those people who have been investing in you all these years as well. And then, you take it and do something with it that's uniquely your own. So, one of the things that I'm curious about for you then is, as you think about us as Feldenkrais, as a field of Feldenkrais, and you told me that you have some familiarity with the Feldenkrais method.
Sure.
It's through Dr. Schleip. I don't know what your exposure is. I know you come from a movement background, so.
Well, I'm verging on 60 years of age. You cannot be my age and having gone through all that I've gone through and not have known about Moshe Feldenkrais. In fact, one of my close personal friends is a man called Dr. John Hannon, and John was very close with Moshe. And I can always remember he told me one story that he was with Moshe Feldenkrais. They were in Italy together, and Moshe was sitting on a glass table, and the glass table crashed underneath him. Literally, the glass table broke underneath him. And he told me that Moshe simply stood up. And I know John Hannon, and I know that John Hannon is not an individual who is likely to tell fairy tales. And the point that John was making to me was that Moshe Feldenkrais didn't just talk the talk, he walked the walk. I was so impressed to hear that he had his body so well balanced that he wasn't relying on the table necessarily, but that he was using the table to just take enough energy out of the system so that he was comfortable. But when that thing happened, that the table collapsed, he was able to return to standing. I was so impressed. And of course, Moshe Feldenkrais has had a big influence on my professional career and on the way in which I think, because Moshe Feldenkrais would have had similar philosophies and similar ideas in terms of the first thing that we need to do is to change the way we view ourselves. Absolutely correct. Yeah. And that's what I love to do in terms of teaching about biotensegrity, and then that opens up the door of possibilities and for people to recognize that you can change. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that with traditional anatomy and these type of approaches, we think that we could only cure change through cutting ourselves open and surgery. And I'm not saying that is not important at times, but all too often people run to go under the knife. And if I can say one thing, by the way, breaking your skin with a knife and opening up the skin to atmospheric air puts you at risk of MRSA. That is a death sentence. So make sure that anybody who's making a decision to go and have a surgery, and sometimes if it's related to cancers, it's absolutely necessary, and science in that regard can be fantastic. But please be aware that there's always a risk involved. So don't be willy-nilly about this idea, well, I've got a little pain in my knee, so I'm just going to go in and have it arthroscopically investigated. No, I would investigate other avenues first. This is not life-threatening. And if you're not getting a resolution after a reasonable period of time, okay, feel free to go the other direction.
Yeah, so I think that when you were talking earlier about how we grew ourselves, I mean, from my perspective, we are continually growing ourselves, and which is not to put a blame on us for the things that happen that are negative, or that we see as negative within our bodies, our systems. But I think of the Feldenkrais work as being a way of us engaging with the growth of ourselves down on the level of the tissue, not just the psychological level, yes, because it all goes together, but down on the level of the tissue, that we can have some level of influence over how we are growing ourselves through the span of our life. When you think of Feldenkrais and the Feldenkrais process of exploring through movement and awareness, and then you think of biotensegrity, what's the most, you could say, one really super important takeaway for those of us who are in the Feldenkrais field? What do you think it is that we might not get, that we could maybe just spend a little more time grasping? Is there something that we could?
Well, I think that the Feldenkrais method is a beautiful method. Actually, I'm not going to find too much fault in it.
No, I think find fault, but maybe something that you think we could focus a little more,
sure.
Widen our lens a little more.
Well, what I would say basically is that, first of all, of course, that I'm hoping that what I might do is that I might be, first of all, giving a language and giving a vocabulary so that people can better explain what it is that they're teaching. People sometimes talk about, stopping and staying still. I use the word acquiescence, because even in stillness, there can be motion and there can be movement. And that is something that I would really encourage everybody to try to embrace a little bit more. Try to encourage in your patients that, yes, movement is life, but also we need to have time for acquiescence, a time for a very specific type of stillness. It's not a nothing. It's not a doing nothing. One of the biggest issues that I have found in my career, in my lifetime on this earth, is that people are not giving themselves the right environment, nor are they giving themselves the time to recover. The vast majority of the problems that we see in the world, the pain issues that people have, are oftentimes down to lack of recovery. And that can also be down to, by the way, to poor sleep. I'd encourage parents who have young children, go and, lie down beside your children when they're fast asleep. Look at them, listen to them, because if you wake the next morning and say to your child, how did you sleep? And they'll say, oh, I had a lovely sleep, Daddy, thank you. They may not have had a lovely sleep. Children aren't good at being able to assess that, but they might be having trouble in school, and they might also then be labeled with being dyspraxic or some other form of of place on the autistic spectrum. Many of these children are struggling because they're simply not putting back what was lost, and we're the same as adults. I'd encourage, and that of course is nutritional as well, and the environment. It's great to have a little bit of TV. It's great for them to be on their iPads, all of that, but everything in balance. And to give the opportunity to put back what was lost, to recover. In exercise science, they'd call it overtraining or staleness. And it's such a simple thing. If we can just get people to take a little more time to have acquiescence in their life, I think that would be a magnificent thing.
Thank you. Well, a question I want to ask of you personally, that since the map is the territory, we're asking people, how would you like to change your own personal map?
Well, my own personal map.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, my own. Well, I think what I strive to do. This is probably not the. What a question.
You don't have to.
You've struck a chord in asking me that question. I'm a child who went to school in the 60s, 70s. I went to school in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. I lost most of my friends to the Troubles. And I seen things that perhaps a child should never see. So I appreciate life every day, and this is what biotensegrity has also taught me. As I said, it has taught me that the rules that govern the outer cosmos are also the rules that govern the inner cosmos. And I've seen a comment on Facebook today. Somebody heard me talking about the heart not being a pump, and they were kind of saying it doesn't make any difference, my goodness. And they also changed the word and said, okay, don't call it a pump, call it something else. It's still the same thing. Oh my goodness, words and vocabulary are so important. We look into a river, we see the water and the rocks and the muck, and we think, well, they're not living, so they're not important. So we can throw any old rubbish into the river, can't we, or out into the sea? Because it's the sea. The sea is vast. What's a bit of plastic? Oh my goodness. I could talk to you about how that changes the dynamic and the tensions and compressions, and so we are symbiotic. We have such a beautiful relationship with all living and non-living things on this earth. Trees breathe out so that we can breathe in. So I don't know if I went off on a tangent there, but it's really about having respect for yourself and having respect for other human beings and having respect for the earth. And everything I've said to you today could be wrong, but that's the nature of science.
Could be wrong, could be useful, it could be not quite right, but still be useful. It could have its time of use.
Yeah, exactly. All I'm doing is I've lived a life. I'm still young enough. I hope I have another 20 odd years left. And all you can do is give witness to the life that you've lived and verbalize that to people who are listening and say, here's my experience, and this is what I've found. I've put effort and I've put time and work into it, and hopefully you'll find it useful.
Thank you. Thanks. I would like to mention that John has a number of books, The Concise Book of Dry Needling, A Practitioner's Guide to Myofascial Trigger Point Applications. He was part of the Atlas of Anatomy that was for the 21st century. It's coming out in 2021. That's going to be yours.
Yes, that's a big project.
Wow, that'll be like your life's work in a book. Okay. And also a couple of other books on trigger point therapy, a guide to healing through trigger point therapy, a guide to fibromyalgia, myofascial pain and dysfunction. So he's got several books out there. If you want to look up and see some of his work, I think it's well worth checking into. I'm sure he's been continually changing, as we can see here from his presentation. And
also, I'll just make a quick mention to the, I run a number of different dissection courses, but I think the one that's probably most popular is the one that I run in Dundee University every June. It's always the last weekend in June of every year. It's using teal soft fix cadavers, which means that if I want to, I could keep the lungs intubated, I can keep fluids moving through the arterial and venal systems. All the colors in the body are natural colors, and it's really like having an anesthetized patient in front of you. And so we have a biotensegrity focused approach, and we have some amazing speakers every year, and we have conversations, and then we go into the Department of Anatomy, and based upon the conversations and the presentations we have, that drives our focus in the dissection room. So if you go to ntc.ie, and then you'll get the drop-down menu for the dissection course. So please, I'd love to have you join me.
ntc.ie
for Ireland. IE. So ntc.ie.
Great. And is that open to people of a certain type of background, or?
So basically, anybody. I really want to get to movement practitioners and to bodywork therapists, and so it's open. I mean, there are certain people who will be allowed to dissect, and other people will observe. But really, the application is open to everybody. Yeah.
Okay, and that this year is still open for applications.
No, unfortunately,
No, it'll be the following year.
Well, it's already open, and in fact, as far as I know, there's probably 12 or 15 people already booked onto 2020. So
2020, okay, great.
It tends to fill up pretty quickly.
No, I would imagine so. I've been watching that schedule myself. So, okay, well, let me just start to wrap us up a little bit here. So just to remind you that if you want to find out more about John and his work or any of the speakers, you just go to feldenkrais.summit.com. You click on the speaker's name and you'll be able to find the links that were mentioned here, as well as Arlene has put them over in the chat there for you. Of course, if you're on the replay, you will need to go and take a look at the speaker page to get those. And this replay will be up probably within a couple of hours, and then it will remain free for 48 hours. If you are like me and this particular talk is one of those ones that you want to go back and take your time with even beyond the 48 hours, then you might want to do the All Access Pass upgrade, which allows you to watch all the talks for the rest of your life if you like, and do all the movement lessons, which there are 19 movement lessons. I have to think about that are in addition to the talks, and then over $500 worth of bonus materials, much of which are lessons. You can do that and still get $25 off while the summit is still in progress. This evening, after our time here at around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Dorothy Hennig will be teaching a short awareness through movements lesson called Tongue Untied, Release the Jaw and Face. So that probably anybody could use to feel like they could get a little extra freedom through here. And then, of course, tomorrow morning, again, we'll be back with Erfili Nikolakopoulou at 6:30 a.m. I think I might have said that all the way through without stumbling for the first time. And at 8 a.m., we're going to continue the structure and tensegrity talk with Oxy Perez, who'll be talking about how somatics and being able to sense yourself has worked to inform architecture and how she's using it in her architecture classes and practice. John, it has been an absolute pleasure dealing with you from the beginning to the end through this entire process. I so appreciate it. And thank you so much for accepting the invitation.
I appreciate your work. I appreciate the efforts that you're going to and that you're, impacting and having a positive effect on so many people's lives. And I just want to throw out a very quick hello, and I think I have his name right. Is it Anastasia? Mm-hmm. He came to my class in Canada. What a beautiful human being. Yes. He's just an incredible guy.
Yes, so our panel discussion that'll be tomorrow after you actually is Anastasia Siotis and Stefan Igled. So I'm not sure I'm saying Stefan's last name correct yet, but those two will be giving us helping me with the panel discussion related to yours, Dr. Schleip's, and Oxy Perez's talk. So.
Wow, and what time is that at?
That will be airing at around 1:15.
Wow.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So maybe you'll be able to tune in because it'll be early evening.
Yes, I'd love to.
Okay, thank you so much. For John and I, we're saying goodbye, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.